Let's get into variables. By the end of this section, you should have a very solid understanding of what a variable is. Variables are kind of like containers in JavaScript. And using variables to store data is the foundation of JavaScript. It really is. And it's done in 3 different parts, but we're going to get into those in later lectures. For now, I just want you to understand that a variable is just a container to store values. That's it. Let's look at Wally. Wally's smart. Remember him? We already know some information about him. His name's Wally Smart. He's only got 34 funds in his account. He's not logged in, and he's got a few favorites. How would we go about storing these into variables? How does this work? I've already mentioned that taking data and later manipulating that data is the backbone of programming. All languages use variables, and variables allow you to store things and use them later. That's all a variable is. So let's take our friend Wally again. These are values, but how do we store them? Well, let's look at each one. Let's create a container, which is just a variable. And let's name that name, because we're going to store Wally Smart's name in. So it's almost like you taking a container and you labeling that container. Let's label it name. And let's put Wally Smart into that container. Let's set that aside now. Let's go down the next list. What about 34? Well, no problem. We've got an unlimited supply of containers. Let's call this one balance, because that's the balance of funds in his account. We can call it anything we want. And let's store that 34 into that container. And we keep working our way down the list. Let's get another container for whether he's logged in or not. Let's label that logged in. And let's store that value in that container. I hope you're seeing a pattern here. We're doing the same now for favorites. We store the favorites in another container. The important point that I'm sure you've picked up on already is that all of these variables were created in the same way. We got a container, we labeled it, and we put in the value. And you can also see that variables can hold different types of data. Think about a container in your pantry. You can put different types of food in those containers. The same thing with JavaScript. We just don't talk food, we talk value types. In our example, logged in is a boolean, balance is a number, his name is a string, and favorites, well, we've just said that's complex. It's actually an array. And in our programming career, in any application you build, you're probably going to have hundreds and thousands of variables that you create in your code. That's why it's worthwhile having a whole section on them so you deeply understand them. Another thing that's interesting here is all our variables have unique names. It would be very confusing if balance somehow became name. That just doesn't make sense. And then you start overriding variables and all of that, and it becomes very messy. Remember, we create variables, we then put values in them, and we can store them. And we should make certain that our variables have distinct names. Let's move on.